Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We have the pleasure of having excellent award winners and honorable mention for the PhD category as part of the Research Impact Canada Engaged Scholarship Award. We will begin by land acknowledgements. So today, as we are not all gathered in the same space, we recognize that this land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you're currently on. We ask that if this is the case, you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. We recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huang, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous people. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. This territory is subject of the District 1 Spoon-Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. Comme nous ne sommes pas tous réunis à un même lieu, nous sommes conscients que ce reconnaissance de territoire ne s'applique peut-être pas au territoire sur lequel vous vous trouvez maintenant. Si c'est le cas, nous vous demandons de prendre la responsabilité de reconnaître le territoire traditionnel sur lequel vous vous trouvez et les titulaires actuels du traité. Pour nous, nous reconnaissons que de nombreuses nations autochtones ont, avec les territoires sur lesquels les campus de l'Université York sont situés, des relations de longue date qui précèdent l'établissement de l'université. L'Université York reconnaît sa présence sur le territoire traditionnel de nombreuses nations autochtones. La région connue comme Toronto a été préservée par la nation Anishinaabe, la Confédération Haudenosaunee, les Huang et les Métis. Elle est désormais le foyer d'un grand nombre de peuples autochtones, nous reconnaissant des titulaires actuels du traité, la première nation des Mississaugas de Credit. Ce territoire est soumis au traité de la ceinture Wampum, District 1 Spoon, en tant définissant le partage et la préservation pacifique de la région des Grands Lacs. Quick housekeeping items I would like to share with you. So how this webinar will work is that first we'll have each of our award recipients and honorable mention present their research project, and then at the end you will have a chance to ask all of them. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so hope that's okay. And if you have anything you would like to add to the chat box, feel free to do so. It is located at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Jade Ho, who is our honorable mention in the PhD category. She will be presenting her research project entitled Place of the Chinatown Grassroots, Aligning Anti-Racism Efforts with Decolonization. Thank you, Jade.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. Alrighty, can everyone see? Yeah, okay, cool. Good morning and good afternoon. I'm so honored to be here, and thank you so much for the honorable mention to this award. My name is Jade. You can also call me Yiqian. I'm actually trying to get people to call me Yiqian more because only my parents call me that. So when people use that name, I feel I'm being punished, and I don't want to have that relationship to my name. Before I start, I want to acknowledge the land that I'm on right now. So I'm on the unceded Indigenous land belonging to the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I just to let you know a little bit more about me, because my research, actually a lot of my personal is within it as well. I'm an international student here at Simon Fraser University. I came in 2013. My family is originally from Taiwan, but we immigrated to Belize, a small Central American country, when I was 12. And then I came here in 2016. So in 2013, and in about 2016, I was very honored and very fortunate to be welcomed into an intergenerational group that are organizing against gentrification and racism in Vancouver's Chinatown. So at that time, this group, alongside many Chinatown working class residents, one of the campaign that was going on is to push back against a corporate landlord's development application in the heart of Chinatown. So this corporate landlord, the development group is called BD Living. And the site that they were applying to develop is the 105 Kiefer Street. If the development were to go through, it will add a luxury condo towers in the very rapidly gentrified neighborhood. So if you go to Chinatown right now, I think it's really, really easy to observe, luxury condos being there, or businesses that actually have nothing to do with the working class residents' lives. For example, like coffee shops or vintage stores, boutique stores. And all what they would do is they will, paint perhaps the color red onto their businesses, or put Chinese name onto their businesses. But what has been happening in the neighborhood is that this new wealthy class is coming into the neighborhood, and more people who are being displaced. So, so during the 105 Kiefer campaign, something that we did is we actually spent 5 years of time from 2012 to 2017 to organize the community, and an intergenerational group actually came together. And okay. Can you see the next slide? No, right? It's not working.
No.
Okay. So in 2017, we actually managed to pack the city hall with more than 200 people to speak against this development. And for the first time in decades, the city actually did deny the development permit license. And this was a historic win for us. So the project or the research that I'm reporting here to all of you is mainly focusing on the very last year of our fight and the year after our victory. In this case, I feel very fortunate that I was being to come into this space, also as a researcher and also as someone who has connection to the academy. And in this sense, that research actually became a space, afford us a space for reflection, and also for record keeping against historic amnesia, to really record down what the community are saying about what they want for their community. And also we use research in the space that bringing everyone's voice so that everyone becomes part of this research. And even though I'm the one writing about it, but this research really belongs to the community. There are many other examples of this type of research, thinking about research as part of organizing, as part of community building. For example, there's another project called Right to Remain, or right now at SFU, there's another project called the Contract Worker Justice. For Right to Remain, they center the tenants, and tenants became part of the research team. And for Contract Worker Justice, South Asian cleaning workers are coming together using the research space to organize. And 105 Kiefer Street is one of these examples. So one of the things that specifically that I wanted to talk about here is that during our fight in 105 Kiefer, we realized that we have to align our struggle with indigenous struggles, and we need to really think about decolonization, because Chinatown, although we are fighting for justice for low-income senior tenants in Chinatown, but Chinatown is still situated on unceded traditional land. Chinatown is actually on the Squamish land called Laklak'i. And Chinatown historically is born out of anti-Asian racism. But people actually made Chinatown into a place of safety. And something that's really important to think about is Chinatown is actually not exclusively for Chinese people. And historically, it has always been a place for many marginalized communities. Chinatown in Vancouver also neighbors the downtown east side, where many urban indigenous people come for shelters, unhoused people, drug user, and sex worker organize in that neighborhood and come and it's a place where some of the last place that people can find shelter. So it is very important that the fight for Chinatown include an understanding of the violent history of the colonial displacement and the responsibility that us as immigrant settlers have on indigenous land, and to understand the consequences of not having decolonization as part of our vision, right? So in the context of fighting against anti-Asian racism, without aligning our vision or our goals with decolonization, these efforts many times can become very dependent on the colonial legal immigration system that perpetuates and further erasure of indigenous people and land, and buy into false ideas or rhetoric like, the model minority or upward mobility. So in this case, decolonization is actually a necessity. But what does it really look like when we engage into this work, right? What does it really look like when we do this work concretely on the ground? Work like this actually hasn't been talked about or reflected on, at least in the academic circle, enough. So here we want to share our journey with everyone, and we know that this is just the beginning, and so we really look forward to hearing feedbacks and discussions and hearing what other communities are doing as well. So right after the 105 Kiefer victory at the Development Permit Board at the City Hall, we had a debriefing meeting. And then in the debriefing meeting, one of the senior stood up and shared that she said that before this fight, she actually could not believe that we could have done that. She thought that as Chinese immigrants, we should just keep quiet, we should keep our head down and not make any wave. But throughout this campaign, she learned that we actually have something important to say. And when we say it together, we're very powerful. And another senior also shared that she feels very isolated and alone in the city. And sometimes she feels very isolated within the Chinatown community. But throughout this campaign, she saw that how many people from the indigenous community, from the downtown east side community come out. And she felt like they actually gained important friendship, and that they need to fight for them just as they fought for us. So the process of 105 Kiefer organizing actually became our collective journey to learn to decolonize and align our struggle with indigenous movement. So this journey includes both our own empowerment and as well as repositioning our relationship with the colonial state and with our indigenous neighbor. So what does this look like? So first of all, we need to learn to reestablish our intergenerational relationship between the elders and youth. And we had to find a way to facilitate that relationship building and knowledge exchange. Together, we also needed to re-envision and reclaim Chinatown, not just as an ethnic enclave, right, but actually as a place of safety, collective care, and connection. We needed to refuse the Orientalist way of understanding what culture is and embody the history that Chinatown has not been an exclusionary space. And we also needed to cultivate relationship building, like actual relationship building, and unlearn and relearn and participate in indigenous organizing and struggle. So in 2017, after 2 years of hosting tea time discussions and house visits, the seniors and youth organizers actually put together a document called The People's Vision, outlining a strategy for Chinatown's social and economic development that centers on the needs of marginalized people in and around Chinatown. So throughout this process, in conjunction with the 105 Kiefer Street campaign, members actually often get together to carry out power analysis of different levels so that our vision is not just narrow, but includes an understanding of the systemic issue underlying our struggles and to understand where we should apply pressure of our collective power. And as I mentioned earlier, we needed to establishing our intergenerational relationship, right? And we also needed to really critically reflect on some of our cultural values, some of the value that are so close to us. How do we translate it in doing justice work? And I can share with you that when I first started, it was actually really hard to be in meetings with the seniors, right? Especially when we have to chair the meetings, because we were taught since we were little, if the seniors are talking, you don't interrupt them. You always say yes, you always obey what they're saying. But then we realized that if we continue that line of thinking, we actually could not have a meaningful discussion. So we needed to learn, how do we translate our intergenerational care, but also being able to hold discussion with each other. If you see the photo on the top left, right, that we hosted a dumpling making event together to kind of like to make food together and also to talk about a vision for Chinatown. And there were like more than 50 people there, and we needed to make like 2,000, something like that, dumplings. And we actually finished in 20 minutes, which is like really crazy time. And one of the senior said, wow, like this really reminds me that when we are together, we are powerful. Even when we make dumplings, it's so fast. There is a Chinese saying that 团结力量大. When we are united, we are powerful. So hosting events like this, it brings our gaps between two different generations together and reflecting on our cultural values. Another really important thing is to undo the centrality of English. So all of our meetings are all held in Mandarin or Cantonese. So we actually rotate, which is a two language that most of the seniors speak. And we also provide translation within those meetings. And another really important fight in the process is also fighting for language access at the city process. I always say, if you want to see how the city of Vancouver is so set up in such a racist and colonial way, go join a city meeting. Because at the beginning, they wouldn't provide any translation, and then we would provide translation for our seniors ourselves, and only to be met by scoldings and being kicked out of the meeting because we had to provide translation for the seniors. However, we fought against that, and we want language accessibility to the city, and the senior feel empowered and emboldened to speak up in their own language about their lived experiences and their place-based knowledge about why they don't need more luxury condos within Chinatown. And at the same time, we also need to be able to have meaningful discussion about how to ensure our fight to remain in Chinatown is not exclusionary, but connected to larger decolonial efforts. We need to first interrogate and unlearn what the colonial state has taught us about each other, and undo kind of the prevailing racial stereotypes about Indigenous people, other marginalized people, and ourselves and the land that we are on. So one of the things that we do is we will read land acknowledgement out loud, actually together at the beginning of all of our meetings. As you can see in the middle of the photo, that's actually our land acknowledgement translation. Because we don't have a direct translation, we don't have a word for unceded. So when we translate unceded territory, it actually is as straightforward as stolen land, the land that has never been given up. So we've been doing this land acknowledgement for about, at that time, for about maybe like 6 months. And no senior has actually made any comments about that land acknowledgement. They would just do it. But then there was one time when we were doing, after we do the land acknowledgement, one of the senior raised her hand and she started asking, she said, so do you mean that Chinatown is on indigenous land? And we were like, yes. And then she said, and then she then asked, so Chinatown is not Chinese people's. Actually, we are on indigenous land. And then she sat down, she didn't make any further comments. But that day in our meeting, we actually needed to discuss about a temporary modular housing that is going to be built in Chinatown. And the city wanted us to provide some thoughts towards that. And that modular housing is going to prioritize indigenous unhoused indigenous people. The same senior actually raised her hand and said, if we are on indigenous land, then we should not put forward our opinion without consultation and without talking to indigenous people. And if this is going to prioritize indigenous people, who are we to have any opinion about it? And I feel like for me, that was actually a particular impactful moment as a young organizer to kind of witness the reorientation of a Chinese senior's relationship to Chinatown, who holds such a strong ownership and such a strong sense of place in Chinatown that she depends on to open up a space for solidarity and for indigenous leadership. So of course, in a lot of contexts, the territorial acknowledgement can be performative, and it can be tokenistic. But when in this case we're experiencing, if we practice it respectfully and intentionally, it actually has really profound pedagogical and transformation potentials. Some other things that we have also done with the seniors is we facilitate personal relationship, kind of like through access to social through social events, and also we will take the seniors to participate in social movements, in demonstrations that are led by indigenous leadership, and provide translation so that they can have the access to also be part of those movements. I know I'm very over time. Sorry, folks. Just quickly to close that, as we experience that during the pandemic, there is a rise in anti-Asian violence. However, I don't know if folks have seen that the hashtag of Stop Asian Hate has actually been co-opted a lot in the Chinatown area, especially by the capitalist Chinese elite, to actually use slogan like "Clean Up Chinatown" to bring in more police presence and to criminalize unhoused people more and more. So it's actually really important for us to understand and align our movement with an understanding that the intricate way Asian racialization can be manipulated and commodified to advance a colonial agenda. So this really is just the beginning of our journey, and this work, we feel like it's not necessary, but it's possible because we're doing it. Thanks everyone to let me rush through that, and I really look forward to our discussion afterwards.
Thank you so much, Yi-Chen. This is really meaningful work that you've done, and thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it. So the next individual who will be sharing with us her award-winning research project is Yehudis Stokes. She will be presenting on her project identifying, measuring, implementing, and evaluating the trauma-informed care in practice. Thank you so much, Yehudis.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Yehudis. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Ottawa in the School of Nursing. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to present today, grateful to Research Impact Canada. And I'll go ahead and give an overview of my project. Of course, I want to acknowledge, in addition to the land acknowledgements, also acknowledge all those that contributed to this project, my thesis supervisors, my advisory committee, my knowledge user partners at CHIO, my research assistants, and funding that I received through my graduate studies and for this project. I have no conflicts to disclose. So today for this presentation, I'll give a quick, as an overview, I'm going to define the term trauma-informed care really briefly because that's what this project was all about. And then I'm going to talk about my partnership with CHIO, the knowledge users at CHIO, the application of the implementation roadmap, and 3 key studies that made up my doctoral research. So trauma-informed care is, in brief, a philosophy of care established upon the principle or notion that systems and providers should ameliorate and not exacerbate the effects of trauma. So those coming into our systems, we should be able to be sensitive to their specific needs. It's an approach to how organizations respond to those who may have experienced or maybe at risk of experiencing trauma, and not only patients, caregivers, but also staff within the system. So that's really brief. All we have time for today in terms of a definition, but a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So as a bit of background, the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario is an acute pediatric hospital in Ottawa, as well as a youth mental health agency and a research institute. I began working at CHIO in 2000. I began working at the Research Institute in 2013 and began working at CHIO as a registered nurse in 2014. At that time, I was also working on my master's degree, which was focused on nurses' knowledge and experiences related to trauma-informed care. And I began to develop relationships with various individuals at CHIO, leadership, clinicians, expressing an interest in furthering trauma-informed care at CHIO. And in 2019, CHIO Mental Health Leadership had identified trauma-informed care as a priority, and they expressed an interest in collaborating through my PhD research. So I took this opportunity to contribute to CHIO's goal through my doctoral research. So in partnership with Mental Health Leadership back in 2019, 2020, I developed a research proposal to facilitate the selection and implementation of a TIC program, trauma-informed care. I initiated a TIC advisory committee consisting of multidisciplinary knowledge users at CHIO, clinicians, researchers, leadership, and together we refined the scope of this proposal. And the project was split into 2 phases, which were broadly separated by knowledge creation and knowledge application, all enveloped within an integrated knowledge translation approach where the knowledge users at CHIO were equal partners within the process. There were several steps within each of these phases, and with the time limits today, I'm just going to grab a Kleenex. I'm going to focus on the 3 studies that made up my thesis work. However, there were several other activities and tasks that we did perform together throughout this project. So our project was, we followed a fluid process based on the implementation roadmap developed by Harrison and Graham. And this roadmap identifies 3 phases of implementation. One is issue identification and clarification. And within that phase, we really sought to understand the local site CHIO's needs, their population, their resources, their current resources, initiated a call to action, generated enthusiasm and interest in this, as well as leadership endorsements. And we identified trauma-informed care interventions that are currently existing and what might fit with CHIO. Phase 2, build solutions and field test them. We focused on selecting and tailoring a TIC intervention to the CHIO setting. We also developed a business case for CHIO. We had endorsement from leadership, and we began planning the implementation and evaluation. Phase 3 is implement, evaluate, and sustain. My thesis project encompassed the first 2 phases of this process. So I'm going to talk about through 3 studies. The first was a scoping review within the first phase, a scoping review of trauma-informed care intervention, or TIC-I, in pediatric mental health settings. Our research questions were, what are the TIC interventions used in pediatric, inpatient, and residential treatment mental health care settings, and what are their components? And 2, what are the implementation goals and strategies used within these trauma-informed care interventions? So in order to frame the data, we used, for the interventions, we used a framework called the AIMD, stands for Aims, Ingredients, Mechanism, and Delivery, in order to really extract and clarify what were the components of these interventions. And then for the implementation strategies, we looked at the reported implementation goals and categorized them based on CIHR implementation goals. And then we categorized implementation strategies based on the ERIC framework. And in brief, our findings were that we identified 49 articles representing 21 distinct trauma-informed care interventions. And we found that the AIMDs, the Aims, Ingredients, Mechanisms, and Delivery, really varied in terms of their content and their level of detail. Briefly, the implications that from this study were, 1, related to really understanding the complexity of trauma-informed care and of trauma-informed care interventions, acknowledging that really needing to clarify what are your aims in taking on a trauma-informed care approach or interventions, what are the ingredients of that intervention going to be, who are your target audiences going to be for that intervention, are you hoping to see changes with patients, caregivers, staff, or all, and considering the complexity of implementation. The importance of clear reporting of trauma-informed care intervention aims, components, implementation strategies, so that we can synthesize the literature of what's being done and transfer this important findings. And finally, we noted that educational trainings were a common strategy across all articles and all interventions. However, many noted that educational trainings are essential but not sufficient in terms of an implementation approach. So really needing to consider a multi-pronged approach to trauma-informed care implementation. The second study I'm going to touch on was a part of the second phase, Build Solutions. And in this phase, this study, we interviewed through interviews and group focus groups, youth, caregiver, and staff at the study site on their perspectives in relation to implementing trauma-informed care. So we wanted to explore their perspectives on their vision of trauma-informed care and identify implementation considerations for implementing our project. We used an interpretive description design, and we held virtual group and individual interviews. Our participants consisted of 3 youth, 1 caregiver, and 21 staff. So we did have more turnout from staff from the other groups. And we had 2 primary themes that emerged. The first was related to the participants' understanding and vision of trauma-informed care, which we conceptualized as understanding and addressing the underlying reasons for distress, which is how they viewed trauma-informed care and how they viewed it being implemented on the unit. There were sub-themes to this theme, which included discussions around whether trauma screening should or should not be a part of this intervention. Many aspects related to taking a more individualized approach to care, what to consider in the unit programming on the inpatient mental health unit, and important considerations relating to connecting to the community. And this was one quote from one youth. To me, trauma-informed care means coming from a place of why people are feeling how they're feeling instead of coming from a diagnosis-based place. What factors are contributing? What factors led you to being suicidal? Looking at how those things arose instead of just putting a Band-Aid on it. The second theme related to factors that would support or limit successful implementation of trauma-informed care. These factors included the need for a broad cultural shift across the entire hospital, even if our focus was initially on the inpatient mental health unit, that this would need to encompass the entire hospital and the entire patient's journey. This cultural shift also included a need to improve staff supports and multidisciplinary team collaboration. Also considering elements of the physical environment on the unit, making it more comfortable and engaging, creating more therapeutic spaces, and considering factors that may limit successful implementation of trauma-informed care, including staff buy-in, the delivery of training, and maintenance and sustainability concerns. So one staff stated, I feel like this is a huge culture shift, like large. It's not just here's a program and let's all follow it. It's a culture that we have to change. I feel like if we're going to truly embody trauma-informed care, it has to be like top down, everybody. Now, from the findings of this study, we identified several key domains to consider in implementing trauma-informed care. And those were, number one, the centrality of relational engagement, both within trauma-informed care and within the implementation of trauma-informed care. So that's kind of this outer circle, relation engagement with everyone involved in this process, youth, caregivers, staff, both within the hospital and outside. Then to consider that inner circle, what are the core components of the trauma-informed care program? What are the considering factors for success or that might hinder success on the mental health unit as well as hospital-wide? And then finally, the importance of intersectoral collaboration, both in patient care and in this movement towards implementation. Now, the third study was around the process of implementation and the lessons learned. So the impact of this partnership. From this partnership with CHIO, I had the opportunity to bring my knowledge and my passion related to trauma-informed care, and as a trainee to identify, synthesize, and analyze the evidence and serve as an implementation facilitator while collaborating with knowledge users. The Trauma-Informed Care Advisory Committee, this multidisciplinary committee at CHIO, they brought the expertise related to the CHIO context, provided feedback on what evidence is useful from a clinician and leadership perspectives, and offered research support and some funding. And throughout this partnership, the Trauma-Informed Care Advisory Committee increasingly recognized the value of incorporating an evidence-informed approach for selecting and implementing a trauma-informed care intervention. Our lessons learned included the importance of leadership involvement and support, and we were quite fortunate to have our director of mental health on board from the very beginning supporting this project. Number 2 related to knowledge users' development of responsibility for decision-making. So throughout this process, at first I really came in and they were seeking answers and were looking for answers from me. And it was a process of empowering the group to take the responsibility and for me to be more of a facilitator of knowledge and for us to work together to make those decisions. And finally, organizational enthusiasm and knowledge user enthusiasm and perseverance is essential for implementing and sustaining this project, even when the going gets tough and other priorities arise. If you can find ways to maintain that enthusiasm, it will be important, which thankfully we did have. And then I just have the status of my publications for this study, but I think I'll just leave that for now, since I think we're out of time, but thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Yehudis, for your excellent presentation on your research project. Next, we have Erin Ratelle, who will be sharing with us her award-winning research project on falls prevention in long-term care using machine learning. Thank you.
All right, so just going ahead and sharing my screen here. And then just a quick thumbs up if folks can see. Perfect, thank you. All right, well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Erin Ratelle and I'm a PhD student at the University of Alberta in the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport and Recreation. And my research is in the realm of sociocultural studies. I have brown, curly, shoulder-length hair, blue eyes, and today I'm wearing an orange turtleneck sweater. And today I'll be chatting a bit more about a community project that I've been involved with that uses an app that uses machine learning for falls prevention. And I got involved with the project because I love riding my bike. You can see there's an image of me here riding my bike across a frozen lake in Northern Ontario and then visiting that same lake in the fall by bike as well. And you're probably wondering, Erin, what does riding your bike have anything to do with falls prevention in healthcare or AI in healthcare? Well, as an avid cyclist, I've become fascinated with all of the apps created in recent years that are geared towards health and fitness. You know, we are increasingly living in a world that is highly integrated with our virtual online world and with technology. We wear Fitbits to track how many steps we walk each day, workout programs, yoga, even meditation can be found in the form of these online applications that we can access through our mobile devices. And this means that increasingly the decisions that affect how we manage our health are not merely determined by humans, but also by algorithms. You know, these sets of mathematical instructions that power these apps. And as numbers or mathematics, algorithms are afforded a sense of objectivity that are implicitly viewed as equitable and true. And software applications programmed, you know, via various algorithms, they're conferred these same understandings, wherein they're often viewed as accurate, unbiased, or taken at face value by the user. But recent research suggests that these applications have the capacity to reinforce existing social inequalities. For example, recently there was a company and they were using AI for the purposes of job recruitment to help, you know, organize and sort the resumes that would come in. And the AI started to pick top candidates based on the types of qualities of candidates that tended to be successful hires. Things like more often picking men, more often picking people who went to certain schools or were from certain places. And as a result, it started to learn to select white, middle, upper class men. And so as a sociocultural student, I got involved in this project, not only because I have this broader interest in health and technology, but also to have the opportunity to lend some of my expertise on the social and ethical implications of using AI in healthcare. And before I chat more about the project, I hope you will join me in acknowledging that the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory, and join me in respecting the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. And this is where I go to school, but I also want to acknowledge my hometown in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. It's where I work and live and play. It's where this research project takes place, which is located on Robinson-Huron Treaty 61 territory, also known as Bawating, the place between the rapids and Ojibwe, and the traditional land of the Anishinaabe and Métis peoples. And I see these land acknowledgements as a settler on these lands as some of the first steps towards reconciliation, but the next steps are the action behind these words and thinking about how your connection to land and the original peoples of that land might inform your actions inside and outside of academia. How might it inform your community research? And as part of my reflection, I want to share the following quote by Robin Wall-Kimmerer in her article, Corn Tastes Better, on the honor system. She writes, "The tools we choose to adopt influence how a culture develops and also reflects a culture's values." And I think we can apply this quote to a variety of settings, but in the case of how we represent our research, the more common tool in research representation, it's often the formal written journal article, a conference presentation. But these articles are only available to a select few who both have the knowledge to critically read and understand the articles and the means to access them. Many of them are hidden behind paywalls. In conferences too, they're typically geared towards academic audiences. So what does this say about our cultural values in the academy more broadly when a jargon-filled, inaccessible document is the hallmark of research practice? And this is not necessarily to discount the publication of research, but to show that journal articles, conference papers, they're just a few of the many ways we can share our research findings, and that depending on your audience may not be the best tools to share your research. There are other avenues for knowledge mobilization, things like this talk today. And this framework of dissemination, it often positions the researcher, sort of the knowledge holder, and the community, sort of this knowledge receiver, which only serves to reinforce the power dynamics between the two, the ivory tower of the academy. But in research and community research especially, one of the big things that I've learned throughout this project is that it is very much a two-way exchange of learning. But what is community? It's a contested word, and yet it's so common in everyday life. Most of us need community, feel community, are part of communities, or encounter community in one way or another. We feel the effects of its absence. To be part of a community can feel good, but it can also feel awful. It can do good, but it can also be oppressive. What is community? Is it uniquely human? Is it a place or a common ground? Is it affection, moral obligation, work, a burden, a joy, a practice? Community can mean all or none of these things to different people in different situations. And throughout the course of this project, has meant many of these things. And partnerships are at the heart of community projects, which I think we've seen with some of the other presentations so far. And so I also want to acknowledge our partners and funders in this project. As I mentioned, community research, it's very much a two-way exchange of learning, and I wouldn't be here chatting with you today about this project if it wasn't for the work, the care, the ongoing support of our community partners and co-researchers. Co-researchers like Dr. Ed Hervey, who's a doctor in family medicine and associate professor at Nawsum University. One of our other key partners, one of whom a representative is here today. Hi, Amanda. Thank you. Welcome for joining. So Amanda is the general manager for Digital Grounds, and Digital Grounds is a Northern Ontario-based company that specializes in the development of custom platform solutions. So they are the technical team who created the falls prevention app, which is called Gentru, that we'll be using in this research pilot. And community research, it often takes time and it takes money. And so I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our funders, the Northern Ontario Academic Medicine Association, or awards like this one with Research Impact Canada that help support me as a researcher. So why is falls prevention important? Well, falls are the leading cause of injury in older Canadians, and they can have life-changing implications on individuals and their families. Falls in older adults represents a $2 billion cost to the Canadian healthcare system every single year. And with an aging population, that amount is only set to increase. And while falls prevention is at the forefront of many healthcare facilities, roughly 80% of falls are unwitnessed. We don't always know how long the person has been on the floor. We often don't know how the fall happened because we're relying on the memory recall of the person who fell, which may not always be reliable, right? You know, could you tell me what you had for dinner last Wednesday? Maybe not. And there are fall prevention strategies out there, but they often tend to be quite expensive, impractical. You know, they might not work. Again, we're still having an issue with falls. So that was our task. How can we break the cycle of falls in older adults? How can we do so in a way that is safe and effective and ethical, that considers the dignity of our residents, that is practical, to co-create something with healthcare professionals so it's not something they have to use, but they want to use it? So for our project, we will be testing a falls prevention protocol that uses a wearable sensor that connects to a mobile app called Gentru that organizes residents based on their real-time falls risk. And then from here, healthcare professionals can then use this information to intervene and prevent falls. And how it works is it's based on the individual resident. So let's say, for example, Jack Smith has a higher falls risk than another resident and gets up and out of bed. He's going to trigger the system and go higher to the top of the list compared to someone who has a lesser falls risk. And how Gentru works is it uses machine learning, meaning the more movement information it's going to take in, the more it learns. And so it's designed to also eventually be predictive, understanding the typical movements that are a precursor to a fall to alert healthcare professionals. Now, falls, they still happen, and so the app is also designed to alert healthcare staff when a fall occurs. So this will hopefully help with things like falls reporting. We know the moment the fall occurs, can hopefully gather more accurate information to understand what happened for the fall. Now, there is research out there that's used sensors combined with an app to detect falls, but typically these haven't taken place in real world settings. It's often been healthy, able-bodied folks falling onto a crash mat and detecting the fall, but not used in a real world setting and not having predictive technologies. So for this project, we'll be testing the falls prevention app at a long-term care home in Northern Ontario, an important partnership as well. Where we compare the number of falls in a control group to an intervention group, and then also comparing this against the historical falls data for these two groups. And our main hope is that first and foremost, this is going to improve resident care and safety, to also improve the daily workflow of healthcare professionals in long-term care. It's been a big part of the project is meeting with the healthcare professionals and saying, okay, what's going to make the most sense for you? Testing this app in a real world setting, and then we aim to start our data collection on this this summer, actually. So I want to thank all of you for joining me. If you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me at ratelle@ualberta.ca. And other than that, I know we'll have a bit of time for questions after the presentations as well. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Erin, and we look forward to the data that you collect in the future. Last but not least, we have a wonderful presenter, Indira, who will be sharing her award-winning research project on developing inclusive digital mental health service interventions based on the mental health priorities of community-dwelling older adults. Thank you so much, Erin and Indira. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Just give me one moment here. Okay, so I hope everyone can see that. I had a little bit of like a hiccup, I guess. So I know that the schedule says that I was supposed to present second, but here we are. It's good. And I'm gonna apologize too for the noise because it's Monday morning here and the garbage trucks are coming and going. But hopefully it won't interrupt my presentation here. And so my presentation today is about my my PhD project on basically aging with good mental health in a digital world. It's developing a framework for inclusive community-based digital literacy interventions for older adults. And I want to thank Research Impact Canada for giving me this opportunity, and also my additional funders who are SFU's Community Engaged Research Initiative, Mental Health Research Canada, and MyTex. And so I know that we don't have a lot of time here and I have a lot to go through, so I'll just get started. Oops. And so firstly, I want to start with an introduction. And I want to, as I'm using a community-based approach, I want to start by talking about sort of the mental health of my community here in the downtown West End. And I'll be focusing on three underserved populations that are common in this community. So please be aware that individuals can belong to multiple underserved groups, but it's easier for me to introduce these issues separately in the meantime. So first are ethnic minorities, and compared to white Canadians, ethnic minority populations are less likely to report depression or major depressive disorders and suicidal thoughts. So the lack of sense of belonging or being like an outsider is known to be associated with higher levels of depression and overall poor mental health. There's also issue around language barriers, which prevents access to services that are mainly provided in English. The second group is the LGBTQ+, and LGBTQ+ older adults have faced sort of a lifetime of criminalized queer identities and lack of social support associated with marginalization, and romantic partnerships among LGBTQ+ individuals are actually twice as likely to dissolve compared to heterosexual marriages. And this is potentially because of stressors such as societal discrimination. And then the last are low-income populations. And basically, the effects of income and economic hardships is associated with mental well-being. And education is probably the most important source of the association, partly because additional education is linked to better pay and housing security. Debtors also report greater symptoms of depression, anxiety, and anger, primarily because they're worried about being able to pay off what they owe, essentially. And as many services and programs transition virtually because of the pandemic, low-income older adults' mental well-being is particularly at risk because they might not be able to afford access to digital technologies. And Statistics Canada shows only a little over half of low-income Canadians use internet, and this is causing this digital divide. And so the digital divide refers to the gap between those who have access to digital technologies and those who don't. And so previous research have mentioned that there are two phases of the digital divide. The first phase is technology access. So this is impacted by one's socioeconomic status, so whether they can afford technology or not. And then the second phase refers to technology skills. So once you've attained the device, can you use it? And this is impacted by education, language, and also having people around to teach you. And also age, because it is harder to learn technology when you've not used technology all your life. And additionally, with COVID-19, it exacerbated the need for technology, but it didn't close the digital divide. And so inaccessible designs and concepts of new technologies have prevented older adults from comfortably utilizing technology to use services to improve their mental health. And so how do we close this digital divide? And so I'm using a community-based approach. And so community-based services are actually more senior friendly than other means of service delivery. And it's important now to use collaborations with senior serving community organizations to close the digital divide for older adults. And why do we want to care about the digital divide? So basically, technology can provide opportunities to alleviate mental health disparities among culturally diverse and other diverse populations. Basically, people of different ethnicities and languages can access services that they need online. For example, using a multicultural mental health center online help. It can also provide free or low-cost mental health services, such as online counseling. and also suicide chat lines, which are free. Technology, therefore, can overcome barriers of time, place, and language. So, sorry. So based on what we know, or I guess not know, about the mental health needs of the population and the digital divide, my PhD project is divided into 3 objectives. So the foundation of the objective is as follows. First, we need to identify what's out there and what's been done. Then what can we learn from it. The second is to identify the needs that are not met, and both of this is going to be used to create a resource that is novel and that can fill the gaps of the unmet needs of the population. And to be more specific, the objectives are identifying existing mental health interventions, and then identifying the factors that affect the mental health of community dwelling older adults to create a framework for digital literacy to improve the mental well-being, health, and also quality of life of community dwelling older adults. And so to answer the first research question, basically I did a systematic review to look at aspects of existing digital mental health interventions to improve the mental health of the older adult population. The results found that successful interventions have the following characteristics: that it is easy to use, have opportunities for social interactions, they have human support, and have the interventions to be tailored to the participants' needs. So for example, if the participant is experiencing social exclusion, then the intervention must be made to meet others and not just a general therapy session, for example. And then this paper also created a list of recommendations for future randomized controlled trials for the topic, because it's not out there yet. And so this systematic review was published in August of 2022 in the Lancet Healthy Longevity. So the lessons learned after the systematic review was that we need to emphasize the digital divide for underrepresented populations and fix it from the ground up. And then we also want to push towards a community engaged research in the digital space. And in this project, therefore, I'm collaborating with Emily Carr, University of Arts and Design, for their insight of using participatory design approach, and my 2 community partners, who are the West End Seniors Network and the South Vancouver Seniors Network. The second objective is to identify the factors that affect the mental health of the diverse population of community dwelling older adults. And I've used a semi-structured interview method with community dwelling older adults in the West End to answer this question. And so I recruited, with the help of the West End Seniors Network, and recruited older adults from the community with different backgrounds and intersections of identities. And it was stopped once we reached saturation. The interviews were around 30 to 60 minutes. And the interview guide was, it included 4 main topics, which are perceived or self-reported mental health, contributors to good mental health, and access to mental health services, which includes digital mental health care delivery. The results are as follows. We found 4 overarching themes that contribute to the mental health of older adults. The first is having a sense of stability, which includes financial stability. As many older adults who live independently in the West End are low income. Sense of stability also included relationship stability, which is the ability to rely on others. And additionally, when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, a lot of older adults found difficulties with maintaining their personal relationships, especially for those who have limited access to technology. The second is being able to do. And so doing is sort of more than just doing activities. It's also about, I guess, the loss of one's ability to do an activity and finding joy in compensating. And so with declining physical health of older adults, some have taken interest in less physically involved activities. However, for participants who feel that they're still able and active, often their biggest barrier is pursuing activities is their safety. And as crimes in the downtown West End have increased after the COVID-19 pandemic, especially to the Asian and the Pacific Islander population, some older adults have found that their daily walks around the neighborhood has become burdensome. The third finding is positively impacting others. So helping others have allowed older adults in the community to feel empowered. And then finally, as many older adults, residents of the downtown West End belong to underrepresented communities, they want to feel belonging and acceptance within their community. And bringing technology back into the picture, a lot of participants explained that belonging to an online community allowed them to gain sort of support and initiate conversations around issues that pertain to their group. And the results for this is now in press, and yeah, you can read more about this over here. And so the last phase is creating a framework to create sort of interventions or services to alleviate the digital divide for community dwelling older adults. And the research question specifically is, how are we developing this digital literacy framework? And so I plan on conducting a focus group with technology coaches and technology coach volunteers specifically at the West End Seniors Network and South Vancouver Seniors Network to talk about the creation of this framework. And I chose to recruit tech coaches, volunteers, because they interact with older adults and have been exposed to the tech challenges that older adults face. And I personally have been a technology coach myself at the West End Seniors Network, and I feel that the discussion will be really impactful. And so the interview guide will be guided by results from phase 1 and 2. So how do we reflect these factors that impact the mental health into a creation of a framework? What are the basic resources that we need? What are the specific health and mental health needs of the population, and what other sort of needs-based knowledge are needed by members of the population? And the creation of this framework can be used hopefully by academics, policymakers, stakeholders, and community organizations across Canada with the hopes of propelling service and program creation to improve the digital literacy of our diverse community dwelling older population. It will hopefully provide equitable access to health and mental health resources and promote independence, and also improve the quality of life of the population. And so my knowledge mobilization strategy, beyond these scholarly articles that I've mentioned, I want to share it beyond academia to the community. And so my partner organization, which is the West End Seniors Network, they are continuing to aid me with these strategies, including offering space in the newsletter for the results that arise in these research projects. And the relationships that I've established with the current and previous executive directors of the organization has allowed me to share this knowledge with other senior serving organizations in the Greater Vancouver area. So I've also hosted seminars regarding digital literacy and mental health at West End Seniors Network, South Vancouver Seniors Network, and beyond. And I'm currently collaborating with the program manager at Burnaby Neighborhood House to develop sort of a digital literacy program, which will include using this framework that I'm going to be creating. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Indira. I do realize that it is 5 minutes past 2. If there are any questions, we could have our speakers perhaps answer it by email if that would work, or maybe because I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. So when we send out the webinar recording, we'll also share with you their email address, if that is okay with our wonderful presenters. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us today. Really appreciate it. We also have our presenters in the master's category presentation coming up on May 24th from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So feel free to join us for that as well. And without taking up more of your day today, I would like to say Have a nice day and be sure to watch out for the webinar recording. Thank you so much to everyone. Thanks to our presenter and audience as well. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Goodbye.